Welcome back to the final expedition log. May 2018, 17,000 feet in the Himalayas. 3 researchers followed barefoot footprints, 15 inches long, moving straight through air too thin to survive. After 3 hours, the tracks simply stopped. No turn, no edge. Just one final print, pressed deeper than the rest, beneath a sheer rock wall. Then the camera failed, and the guide said, "Stop talking, look up." This is what they recorded in the 48 hours that followed. On May 19th, 2018, Dr. Samuel Wright led a 3-person research expedition into the upper Khumbu Valley, Nepal. At an operational altitude of 4,800 meters. The mission objective was straightforward: document historical trade routes and measure glacial recession along rarely surveyed mountain passes below the Nuptse Ridge. Wright had secured funding through the Kathmandu Historical Society. His team included Tenzing Norbu, a high-altitude guide with 14 years of experience in the region, and Claire Houghton, a field camera operator specializing in extreme environment documentation. The expedition was scheduled for 6 days. Base camp was established at 4,200 meters. All communication equipment was functional. Weather forecasts were favorable. Wright's expedition log from the first day notes standard acclimatization procedures. The team ascended slowly, monitoring oxygen saturation levels and maintaining radio contact with base support in Namche Bazaar. Norbu led the route selection, avoiding crevasse fields and unstable seracs. Houghton filmed landscape panoramas and geological markers. By nightfall, the team had covered 3.7 kilometers and camped at 4,650 meters. Wright recorded air temperature at -8 degrees Celsius. Wind speeds were negligible. The night passed without incident. Day 2 began at 6:20 local time. The team broke camp and continued northeast along a ridgeline paralleling the Nuptse Glacier. Wright's notes describe clear visibility and firm snow conditions. At 9:35, approximately 1.2 kilometers from the previous night's camp, Tenzing Norbu stopped the group without explanation. He crouched near the snow surface, examining something ahead. Wright and Houghton approached. What Norbu had found was a series of footprints crossing the snowfield in a straight line, descending from higher elevation and continuing toward a rock outcrop 400 meters distant. The prints were large. Wright measured the clearest impression at 38 centimeters in length and 16 centimeters across the forefoot. The depth varied between 8 and 11 centimeters, suggesting significant weight distribution. Heel strikes were pronounced, and toe definition was visible in several prints. The stride length averaged 1.4 meters. Norbu pointed out that no climbing equipment marks were present. No crampon punctures, no ice axe drag, no trekking pole indentations. The prints showed a barefoot or soft-soled pattern. Wright initially suggested a large mammal, possibly a bear, but Norbu dismissed this immediately. Bears do not move in straight lines at that altitude, he explained, and their gait is wider, more lateral. These tracks showed bipedal motion. Houghton began filming the prints at 9:50. Her footage captures the scale clearly. Each impression is sharp-edged, undistorted by wind or sun exposure, indicating recent formation within the previous 6 to 8 hours. Wright noted in his log that the tracks appeared during the night, while the team slept 1.2 kilometers away. Ambient temperature records suggested the prints would have been made between midnight and 4 o'clock, during the coldest part of the cycle when snow's surface is firmest and most likely to hold definition. At 10:05, Norbu proposed following the tracks. Wright agreed. The decision was documented in the expedition log as an addendum to the primary research objective. Opportunistic field documentation of unidentified biological trace evidence. Houghton activated continuous recording mode. The team proceeded northeast, maintaining a pace of approximately 1.8 kilometers per hour, slower than standard travel speed due to frequent stops for measurement and photography. The tracks continued without deviation. There were no signs of hesitation, lateral movement, or backtracking. Stride length remained constant. At 11:20, the team reached an elevation of 5,100 meters. Oxygen levels were noticeably thinner. Wright's log notes mild headache onset, typical for rapid altitude gain, but all team members remained functional. Norbu appeared unaffected. The tracks led upward along a scree slope, then crossed a navy field where older, compacted snow allowed less distinct impressions, but still showed clear directionality. Wright recorded atmospheric observations every 30 minutes. Wind speeds increased slightly to 12 kilometers per hour. Cloud cover remained minimal. Visibility exceeded 10 kilometers in all directions. The surrounding landscape was devoid of wildlife. No birds, no marmots, no signs of recent animal activity apart from the tracks they were following. Houghton mentioned this in a voice note captured on her recording equipment. "It's too quiet up here, even for altitude." At 13:15, the team paused for hydration and caloric intake. They had been following the prints for over 3 hours. Norbu studied the terrain ahead through binoculars, scanning the upper ridges and rock faces. He said little. Wright reviewed the GPS data, confirming their position at 5,240 meters, approximately 440 meters above base camp, and significantly higher than the planned route for day 2. The original itinerary called for a maximum altitude of 4,900 meters. Wright consulted with Norbu, who recommended continuing for another hour before reassessing. The tracks were still visible, still moving upward in the same unwavering line. At 14:30, the snowfield began to narrow. The tracks approached a steep rock face below the Nuptse Ridge. The terrain became more technical, requiring careful foot placement and occasional use of hands for balance. Houghton continued filming despite the physical demand. Wright's breathing grew labored. Norbu maintained his position at the front, setting the pace. The tracks did not slow. They did not widen or show signs of difficulty. Whatever made them had moved through this section with the same steady efficiency as the easier ground below. At 15:42 local time, the tracks stopped. The final footprint was located on a flat section of neve approximately 4 meters from the base of a near vertical rock wall. The print was clean, deeply impressed, and showed no signs of scuffing or exit movement. Wright knelt beside it, noting that the depth of the heel impression was greater than in previous tracks. Approximately 13 centimeters compared to the 8 to 11 centimeter average observed earlier. Houghton filmed the print from multiple angles, while Norbu examined the surrounding area. There were no other marks, no handprints on the rock face, no boot scuffs indicating a climb, no rope anchors, no chalk residue, no disturbance in the snow beyond the single final impression. The subject had not turned around. There were no corresponding prints leading back. It had not jumped or slid. There were no impact craters or streaks in the snow. The wind had not erased subsequent tracks. The surrounding surface was undisturbed and firm. Wright stood and looked upward at the rock face. It rose nearly vertical for 80 meters before angling back into a ridgeline obscured by afternoon shadow. Houghton adjusted her camera settings to capture the upper formations. Norbu remained silent, his gaze fixed on the cliff above. Wright asked him directly, "What do you think happened here?" Norbu did not answer immediately. Instead, he gestured for the team to stop talking. The wind had dropped. The usual ambient noise of glacial movement, distant cracking, ice settling, thermal expansion had ceased. The silence was total. Then Norbu said quietly, "Look up." Houghton raised her camera toward the rock face. The lens struggled to focus in the flat light of high altitude where contrast diminishes and depth perception fails. Wright stepped closer to the wall, craning his neck to scan the upper reaches. The cliff rose in a series of fractured granite shelves, each layer dark against pale sky. There were no ledges wide enough for a human to stand. No caves or overhangs that could conceal anything larger than a nesting bird. The surface was sheer, unclimbable without technical gear. Yet Norbu's posture had changed. His shoulders were tense. His breathing, normally controlled even at extreme altitude, had become shallow and deliberate. Wright asked what they were looking for. Norbu did not respond with words. He pointed upward, holding his arm steady, indicating a section of rock approximately 60 meters above their position. Houghton zoomed her lens to maximum magnification. The footage shows rough stone texture, patches of ice clinging to cracks, and shadow pooling in vertical fissures. For 2 seconds, the image remains stable. Then the autofocus engages, hunting for a target. The lens contracts and expands rapidly. The automatic exposure drops sharply, as if compensating for a sudden change in light values. Something large and dark against the snow-lit stone. The footage lasts 3 seconds before the camera refocuses on empty rock. Houghton lowered the equipment, frowning at the display screen. She replayed the sequence. Wright moved beside her to watch. The playback showed the same autofocus disturbance, the same exposure shift, but no clear object. Just a blur of motion that could have been a shadow cast by moving clouds, except there were no clouds in that section of sky. Norbu turned away from the wall. His voice was quiet but firm. "We leave now." Wright objected. They had followed the tracks for hours. The final print represented a significant anomaly, something that required documentation and analysis. He wanted to establish a perimeter, take soil samples, measure the depression angle of the print, and conduct thermal imaging of the rock face to detect residual heat signatures. Norbu was already packing his gear. He did not argue. He simply stated that the expedition would descend immediately, and if Wright chose to remain, he would do so without a guide. Houghton looked between the two men, uncertain. Wright pressed the issue, asking for a rational explanation. Norbu provided one. In the Khumbu region, certain areas above 5,000 meters are avoided after midday, particularly zones where tracks appear without corresponding exit paths. Local knowledge, passed through generations of guides and porters, identifies these as watching zones, places where the Migö observes from high ground. The entity does not hunt. It does not descend to ground level unless provoked or cornered. Its primary behavior is surveillance. When tracks stop abruptly, it means the subject has moved vertically, not forward. When the wind ceases and ambient sound drops, it means something large enough to displace air currents is nearby and stationary. When camera equipment malfunctions in clear conditions, it means reflected light is being absorbed or blocked by mass that was not there moments before. Wright asked if Norbu believed they were being watched. Norbu corrected him. They had been watched since they began following the tracks. The question was whether the watcher had now realized it had been noticed. If so, the situation had changed. The Migö, according to monastery records Norbu had studied during his training, does not react well to direct observation. It does not attack, but it follows. And it follows until the observed party leaves its territory or until environmental conditions deteriorate to the point where survival becomes uncertain. Wright noted this explanation in his log at 1605, appending it with his own assessment. Norbu is not superstitious. His concern appears genuine and based on experiential knowledge I lack. Recommend compliance. The team began descent at 1612. Houghton continued filming intermittently, capturing the return route and periodic glances upward toward the ridge. The tracks they had followed earlier were still visible in the snow, though shadows had lengthened and definition was harder to read. Wind speed increased to 18 kilometers per hour. Temperature dropped to -12 degrees Celsius. Wright's headache intensified, a combination of altitude and adrenaline drop. Norbu set a faster pace than the ascent, moving with urgency but without panic. He did not look back at the rock wall. At 1650, Houghton stopped to adjust her pack straps. While stationary, she heard a sound, a deep, resonant exhalation, like breath forced through a large cavity. She described it later as similar to a whale's blowhole, but drier, more controlled. The sound came from above and behind, somewhere on the upper ridge they had just left. She turned and raised the camera reflexively. The lens captured only stone and sky. The sound did not repeat. She rejoined the group without mentioning it. The footage timestamp shows a 12-second recording gap during this period, which Houghton could not explain during post-expedition debriefing. By 1730, the team had descended to 4,900 meters and re-entered the planned route corridor. Visibility decreased as cloud cover moved in from the east. Norbu selected a camp position on a wide, exposed plateau with clear sightlines in all directions. No rock walls nearby, no high ground within 200 meters. Wright questioned the location choice. Standard protocol recommended sheltered positions to minimize wind exposure. Norbu overruled him. Tonight, he said, visibility mattered more than comfort. Houghton set up her equipment and began reviewing the day's footage while Wright prepared the evening meal. At 1945, after sunset, Norbu conducted a perimeter check with a handheld spotlight. He walked a full circuit around the camp, scanning the terrain beyond their position. Wright joined him, asking what signs he was looking for. Norbu explained that the Migö, if it had followed them down, would not enter the camp. It would position itself at the edge of visibility, maintaining distance, but preserving line of sight. Its eyes, according to local accounts, reflect light poorly, not like an animal's retinal tapetum, but with a dull amber glow easily mistaken for rock discoloration or distant fire. Norbu swept the light across a series of boulders approximately 150 meters to the northwest. He held the beam steady for 5 seconds, then moved on. Wright saw nothing unusual. Inside the tent, Houghton had isolated the footage from 1542, the moment when the camera lost focus near the rock wall. She enhanced the contrast and slowed the playback to quarter speed. The result was inconclusive, but unsettling. During the autofocus disturbance, a region of pixels approximately 2 meters tall and 1 meter wide showed motion blur inconsistent with camera shake. The blur moved slightly upward and to the left, suggesting either the subject had shifted position or the lens had tracked something that was no longer present when focus was re-established. She saved the file with a timestamp note. Possible figure unconfirmed. Requires forensic analysis. Wright returned to the tent at 2010 and reviewed Houghton's findings. He agreed the footage warranted further examination, but cautioned against premature conclusions. Lens artifacts at extreme altitude were common. Thermal expansion of equipment, UV radiation effects, and atmospheric distortion could all produce similar results. Houghton accepted this, but asked why the automatic exposure had dropped so sharply. Wright had no answer. Norbu entered the tent and recommended sleep. Tomorrow's descent would cover 12 kilometers to base camp. They needed to leave before dawn. At 23:20, Wright woke to silence. The wind had stopped completely. No tent fabric rustling, no distant ice cracking, no thermal contraction sounds from the glacier below. He checked his watch, confirmed the time, and listened. The silence persisted for nearly 40 seconds. Then, from somewhere beyond the tent's northwest side, came a single heavy impact. Something large settling onto frozen ground. The sound was not repeated. Wright activated his headlamp and exited the tent. Norbu was already outside, standing motionless, facing northwest toward the boulder field. Wright asked if he had heard it. Norbu nodded. Houghton emerged, camera in hand, and began recording. The spotlight revealed nothing but rocks and snow. No movement. No tracks. Norbu walked 20 meters toward the boulder field and then stopped. He crouched and examined the snow surface. Wright joined him. There, just visible in the spotlight beam, was a single depression in the snow. Broad, asymmetrical, approximately 40 centimeters across. The depth was shallow, no more than 4 centimeters, as if something heavy had briefly rested there before lifting off. The edges were smooth, not scuffed. No entry or exit marks surrounded it. Norbu stood and backed toward camp. He spoke quietly. "It knows where we are. We leave at first light, no delays." Wright photographed the depression from 3 angles, noting GPS coordinates and ambient temperature. Houghton filmed the surrounding area in a continuous sweep. The camera captured nothing else. They returned to the tent at 23:38. No one slept deeply. Wright's log entry for the night reads, "Unidentified contact event. Physical evidence present but insufficient for classification. Departure protocol confirmed." The team broke camp at 5:15, 40 minutes before sunrise. Ambient temperature had dropped to minus 16 degrees Celsius. Norbu conducted no perimeter check. He packed methodically, securing gear in silence, and began descending before Wright and Houghton had finished loading their packs. Wright documented the overnight depression one final time, measuring its dimensions with digital calipers. 41 centimeters at the widest point, 4.2 centimeters deep at center, smooth-walled with no crystalline fracture patterns that would indicate tool-made origin. The snow around it was undisturbed. He took a core sample using a titanium probe, sealing it in a thermal container for later analysis. By 6 o'clock, the team had descended 300 vertical meters. Cloud cover obscured the upper ridges. Visibility extended roughly 400 meters in all directions. Houghton walked between Wright and Norbu, filming intermittently. Her footage shows standard alpine terrain, scree fields, compacted névé, occasional rock outcrops. At 6:34, she panned the camera behind the group, capturing the route they had just traveled. The upper slopes were visible through breaks in the cloud. For 3 seconds, a dark vertical form appears on a distant ridge, approximately 800 meters upslope. The figure is motionless, silhouetted against lighter cloud cover. Houghton did not notice it during filming. The form does not appear in subsequent frames. At 7:10, The team paused for hydration at 4,600 meters. Norbu checked the GPS and confirmed they were on schedule to reach base camp by 1300. Wright asked if he believed they were still being followed. Norbu did not answer directly. Instead, he pointed out that the wind had returned, ambient sound was normal, and no further physical evidence had appeared since the overnight depression. These were positive indicators. However, he added, the Migö does not follow beyond certain altitude thresholds. Once the team descended below 4,400 meters, they would exit the traditional monitoring zone. Until then, protocol required constant movement and no extended stops in areas with overhead exposure. Houghton reviewed her overnight footage during the brief rest period. She noticed the silhouetted figure on the ridge and showed it to Wright. He examined the playback frame by frame. The figure appeared in exactly 9 frames, spanning 0.3 seconds of real-time recording at standard frame rate. Its height, estimated using known ridge dimensions, was approximately 2.4 meters. The proportions suggested bipedal stance, though details were obscured by distance and backlighting. Wright asked Houghton if she had seen it while filming. She had not. The camera had been panning automatically while she adjusted her footing on uneven terrain. Wright suggested the figure could be another climber or trekking group. Norbu dismissed this immediately. No expeditions were scheduled in that sector during this period. The ridge in question was not part of any established route and offered no strategic value for acclimatization or summit attempts. Furthermore, the figure showed no movement across all 9 frames. No weight shifting, no postural adjustment, no response to wind or cold. A human standing motionless at that altitude and temperature would exhibit involuntary movement within seconds. The figure was stationary as stone. Descent continued at 7:25. The team entered a boulder field requiring careful navigation. Loose rock and hidden ice made footing unpredictable. Norbu maintained a steady pace, choosing routes that avoided areas with overhead cliffs or narrow passages. Wright's log notes this deviation from the ascent path, describing Norbu's route selection as deliberately favoring open terrain with maximum sky visibility, even when this required additional lateral distance. By 9 o'clock, they had reached 4,400 meters. Norbu visibly relaxed, his breathing steadied. He allowed a longer rest stop. During this stop, Wright conducted an equipment check. All communication devices were functional. The satellite phone registered full signal strength. He placed a call to base support in Namche Bazaar, reporting the team's position and estimated arrival time. The contact confirmed receipt and logged the information. Wright mentioned the track discovery and overnight contact event in neutral terms, describing them as unidentified trace evidence requiring further review. Base support acknowledged without comment. The call ended at 9:17. No mention was made of early evacuation or safety concerns. Houghton used the stop to catalog her footage. She had recorded approximately 4 hours of material across 2 days, including the track documentation, the rock wall sequence, the overnight depression, and the descent. She noted several additional anomalies in the metadata. 3 separate instances where the camera's internal chronometer had skipped forward by 8 to 12 seconds without corresponding recording gaps. And 1 instance where the ambient audio track contained a low-frequency oscillation below normal human hearing range, but visible in the waveform analysis. She flagged these for technical review, but did not consider them critical failures. Wright asked Norbu about monastery records he had mentioned earlier, the historical accounts describing the Migö as a high-ground observer. Norbu explained that these records were maintained by the Tengboche and Pangboche monasteries. where oral histories and written observations dating back several centuries were preserved. The accounts were not religious texts, but practical records kept by traders, herders, and early mountaineers who worked in the region. The descriptions were consistent. A large, bipedal figure, dark-furred or dark-skinned, observed at extreme altitudes during winter and early spring. The entity avoided direct contact. It appeared on ridges, cliff edges, and high passes, always above the observer, never below. The most relevant detail, Norbu continued, was behavioral. The Migö did not hunt food. It did not defend territory in the conventional sense. Its primary action was observation, watching climbing routes, migration paths, and human movement through high-altitude corridors. When observed in return, it would maintain position briefly, then withdraw to higher ground. However, if the observer attempted to approach or document the encounter aggressively, the Migö would shift behavior. It would begin following the observer, maintaining visual contact until the individual left the altitude zone or conditions became dangerous. There were accounts of expeditions experiencing equipment failures, route disorientation, and psychological stress during these follow periods. None of the records described direct physical attacks. Wright recorded this information in his log with a note. Cultural knowledge intersecting with observed phenomena. Norbu's interpretation aligns with physical evidence, but remains speculative. Recommend ethnographic follow-up and forensic analysis of collected materials. The team resumed descent at 10:05. Cloud cover thickened. Visibility dropped to 200 meters. Temperature rose slightly to -9 degrees Celsius. The terrain became less technical, transitioning into glacial moraine and alpine meadow. By 11:30, they had descended to 4,100 meters. The monastery at Tengboche was visible in the valley below. At 12:50, the team reached base camp. Wright immediately secured the snow core sample and photographic evidence in a waterproof container for transport to Kathmandu. Houghton transferred all footage to redundant storage drives. Norbu filed a route report with the local trekking authority, noting the discovery of unidentified tracks and recommending temporary avoidance of the upper Nuptse approach until further assessment could be conducted. The recommendation was logged but not enforced. On 22 May 2018, 3 days after the expedition's return, Wright submitted preliminary findings to the Kathmandu Historical Society. The report included GPS coordinates of the track site, photographic documentation, and Houghton's video footage. The snow core sample was sent to a glaciology lab in Pokhara for analysis. Results indicated standard neve composition with no biological material present. The lab noted this was expected, as footprints compress snow but rarely deposit tissue or hair unless the subject is injured or bleeding. The video footage underwent forensic review by a media analysis firm in Delhi. Their report, dated the 8th of June 2018, concluded that the autofocus disturbance at the rock wall was consistent with transient obstruction of lens view by object or atmospheric phenomenon, but could not confirm the nature of the obstruction. The silhouetted ridge figure was classified as unidentified humanoid form, insufficient resolution for species determination. The audio anomalies were attributed to equipment vibration and environmental interference. No evidence of digital manipulation was found. Wright proposed a follow-up expedition for October 2018 after monsoon season. Funding was not approved. The Kathmandu Historical Society cited budgetary constraints and lack of academic relevance to the original research objectives. Norbu declined to guide any future expeditions to the upper Khumbu during winter months. He stated that the tracks had been documented, the evidence collected, and further investigation would yield diminishing returns against increasing risk. Houghton archived her footage and moved to a different project in Bhutan. The final expedition log, filed on June 15, 2018, contains Wright's closing assessment. Physical evidence supports presence of large bipedal entity operating above 5,000 meters in Nuptse region. Behavioral patterns align with historical local accounts. Subject demonstrates vertical mobility and environmental awareness inconsistent with known wildlife. Recommend ongoing monitoring by regional authorities and inclusion of findings in high-altitude safety briefings. No monitoring was implemented. The site was not revisited. Field Note Addendum. The tracks did not simply end. The final footprint showed compression depth 30% greater than preceding impressions, consistent with vertical weight transfer rather than forward momentum. The Migö does not retreat when observed. According to local knowledge, it ascends. And once it ascends, the encounter is over. Not because the entity has left, but because it has moved to a vantage point where observation continues without interference.